Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading through and translating a short text on the Computus, which was written by Notker Labeo. Now, Notker Labeo was a monk, a Benedictine monk, writing in St. Gall Monastery, which is now in modern-day Switzerland, and he is especially well known for creating a lot of translations into Old High German, and this text is one of them. Unfortunately, we have both the High German here and presumably the Latin original on the other side, so we're going to be comparing the two of these translations. Now, as for what the Computus itself actually is, it's one of these rare subjects which I start talking about on my channel, where I'm actually somewhat qualified to talk about it, because Computus is what the subject of my PhD is. Now, the short answer is that Computus is a series of academic disciplines in the Middle Ages which enabled monks and priests to calculate an appropriate date for Easter, because there are a lot of complicated astronomical considerations that have to be taken into account in order for Easter to be orthodox and appropriate. I'm not going to go into that so much right now, because partly because the text itself is going to tell us some of these features, and also because it's more properly a subject for another time. Probably after my PhD itself is finished, I'm going to be doing videos on what the Computus itself was, how it's interesting, the manuscript my PhD is based on, etc., etc. But for now, let's get into it and read through the Old High German first, and forgive me as usual if my Old High German pronunciation is not the best. So, ein questio ist in compoto, cedero die andere segent. Tats ist tiu, waar de ostrun staan sullen. Des wil swotwigo sus convurtet, so eris plenilunum cascichet nach evenachten, an demo pleniluno werdent ostrum. Evenachtes sind jahrlichen in 12 Kalendis Aprilis, aber plenilunium ist allero monolithen in 50 Luna. Cumit tium morgenum apter dien Evenachten in 11 Kalender Aprilis, so ist tats de Osteltag, ube tat Sunnentag ist. Ube ets Sunnentag ist, so ist Sunnentag cumit, so sind auch Ostern kommen. Vonne diu fernim its abe, suene eris plenilunium casceche nach equinoctio in martio alde in aprili. So quote te sunnontages, tar havest tu Ostrun. Tes ne werdet niome wechsel. Diu soll man aber bitten, und equinoctium vergange und de plenilunium komme. Ane dats tats warde Ostrun sind und wardi resurrectioneme, ubi verdia finstri der sundon überwinden mit temo lichte der guati. Also diu sunna begunnet überwinden diu Nacht. So, what does all of this mean? So, ein questio ist in computo. There is one questio in computo. Now, you probably noticed straight away, and I've actually put these Latin loanwords in italics so that they stand out. There are a lot of Latin loanwords here, and as somebody who, for my research, is studying computistical texts written in vernacular languages, most notably Old English, it's interesting that Notker's Computus seems to have a rather heavier use of loanwords than many Old English texts themselves tend to do, particularly written by known authors such as Alfred of Evesham or Birchfirth of Ramsey. So, questio in Latin is just a question, similar to how we have in English, or a seeking, and then computo is computus. And it's curious, this one, because in Old English they actually they don't use that often the loanword for computus. Sometimes in Old English texts they do, but more common they simply call it Jeremkraft, which is sort of counting craft or arithmetic skill. So it's interesting that they don't use an indigenous Germanic word for computus here, which suggests actually that in St. Gall, they are viewing Computus as something which is its own subject, distinct from mathematics, whereas the word Jervimkraft in Old English, that can refer to any kind of numerological operations, which is why in, I believe, the poem St. Andreas, when the dog heads are described as having St. Andreas in prison and they put a number tag on the prisoners indicating the day in which they are to be consumed, that number tag is referred to as speaking through Jervimkraft. So clearly in Old English, Jervimkraft can refer to any kind of numerological communication, whereas in this Computus by Notker, Computus is its own distinct separate thing. So they're treating the study of Computus as distinct from the study of mathematics, which is quite interesting. So a lot of meaning out of just one clause, but so ein quaestio est in computo, there is one question in Computus, tedzera the andere second, to which the others look. So there's all sorts of fine questions in Computus. I mean, the Venerable Bede's book, De Temporum Ratione, on the reckoning of times, it's massive, like I think about 70-something chapters, so many different questions that you can ask about the Computus, but they're all essentially trying to work out one simple question. Tuts ist du. That is this. Waar the Osteren staan zullen, where the Easter should stand, or where the Easters should stand. Des will swartigo sus kant vertet. So this will be soon answered thus. So eris plenilunium kescihet nach evenachten. So the first plenilunium, and plenilunium is just full moon in the Latin, kescihet nach evenachten. It comes after the equinox. Now, this is a curious one, because this is the first time in this text that they have a Germanic cognate or term for the Latin one. And we see down below that sometimes Nocte also is using the Latin term for this, equinoctium. But the fact that, at least from what I'm seeing here, we don't have Notker using a Germanic term for plenilunium, so for the full moon, perhaps this wasn't something that in, say, indigenous timekeeping and Germanic timekeeping at this, in that region, was all that marked. Perhaps they didn't really have a term for full moon that equated to plenilunium in the same way as Latin did, or perhaps it's just a coincidence that he just happened not to use the term plenilunium, or the Germanic term for plenilunium. But anyway, so the first full moon comes after the equinox. An themo plenilunio verdent ostron, in which full moon the Easters should come. So Easter has to fall after the first full moon of Nisan, which is the 14th month in the Jewish, which is the first month in the Jewish liturgical calendar. And on that day, the Jews always celebrate their Passover and their Pascha. But Christians over time, essentially because of anti-Semitism, didn't want to celebrate with the Jews. And so a pope put out an issue saying that Christians must not celebrate on the same day with the Jews. So Easter has to take first place after the first full moon of Nisan, and it cannot be celebrated on that same moon. And it has to be celebrated on a Sunday, which you can already see is limiting the number of days that one can, in an Orthodox fashion, celebrate Easter. So that's why they're saying that in this first full moon that comes after the equinox, Easters shall take place. Even Nachte sind jaarlichen in 12 kalenders aprilis. The equinoxes, Evenachte, literally even nights, sind jaarlichen, they happen yearly on the 12th day before the calendars of April. This is also quite interesting in that it's using a system which I'm going to tentatively say is closer to a Germanic indigenous system of counting, because one of the things I'm researching for my thesis is how in Old English there seems to be a counting system which we can see represented in poems such as the Old English Menologium. It's used in places in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, essentially in texts which are composed originally in Old English and also the Old English martyrology, we seem to see an alternative dating system to the Roman system, which was predominant in calendars and in all sorts of literary texts at the time period. So the Romans, of course, had their calendar where they counted days until the next feast, so until the calends, until the ides, the nones. There's one that I'm leaving out now, but the Germanic indigenous system seems to simply have counted days of the month as we do today in English. So we say the 24th of April. We don't say 6 days or 7 days until the first day of May, as an example. So the fact that they're saying the 12th calends of April here is curious to me. I mean, this could be a coincidence. This could simply, and the 11th calends of April here. I wish we had more dates to see. Like, if we had a date which is not how the Romans would express it, because the problem is the calendar is just the first day of the month. So a Germanic formula can say so-and-so days until the calends, but a Roman formula might say so-and-so days until the ides or the nones. So that complicates things a bit in terms of figuring out which system Notker is using here, because if it's one of those dates where the Romans would have said until the calends, then that date could function in the Roman or the Germanic system. But the Germanic system won't say so-and-so days until the nones or the ides because they don't celebrate the nones or the ides. It's a Germanic culture. So what I'm saying is this text could seemingly fit into either one of these systems, which I find interesting. We just don't have enough Old High German Computus by Nocte for us to really get a sense of which system he's using, but it would be interesting if he was using this system of just counting the number of days in a month, and he might be from the dates that we have given here. But anyway, this sentence means eben nach des Indialichen in 12 Kalends Aprilis means the equinox happen every year on the 12th day before the calends of April. So I believe this is March 24th or something like this. It's around that date. I'm not too great at the counting stuff. Aber plenilunium ist allero monatlichen in 50 Luna. My German numbers are horrible, do forgive me. But the full moon happens every month on the 15th moon. And this is because, of course, lunar months alternate between 29 and 31 days. So on average, you have 30 days. So on the 15th day is when you'll have your full moon. Kommet tiu morgenon after den evennachten in 11 kalenders Aprilis, so ist das der Ostertag, über das Sonnentag ist. So, kommet tiu morgenon is when it comes to the morning, after the evennachten, after the equinox, in 11 kalenders Aprilis, on the 12th calendar of April. By the way, the fact that it says they happen every year on the 12th calendar here and then the 11th here, this is probably just a scribal error. Scribes often miss off Roman numerals like this, which is unfortunate when you're a researcher studying this kind of stuff, because a text which has a mistake in its computistical calculations could have the mistake because the composer of this text himself was not that great at their mathematics, or it could be because the scribe just happened to miss out one of your letters, especially if you have a text which is only attested in a single manuscript, because then you can't even check with other texts to see if the scribe maybe got it right in a different place or a different scribe got the text right in a different place. So just bear in mind that he probably meant to say 12 here, and a scribe has messed it up somewhere along the way. So when it comes to the morning after the equinox, the 12th day before the 1st of April, so is tatst der Ostertag. That is the Easter day, über das Sonnentag ist, if it is a Sunday. Ove et Sonnentag nist, if it is not a Sunday, so this Sonnentag kommet, so sind auch Ostern kommen. So, as soon as the first Sunday will come, that is when your Easter will have come. Pretty simple stuff. So, what he's saying thus far is, Easter is going to come on the morning after the equinox, on the 12th day before April, if it's a Sunday. And if it's not Sunday, you wait until the next Sunday. Vonne du vernimm its aber. From this, vernimm its aber basically means don't forget this. Suene this plenilunium gesceche nach equinoctio in martio alde in aprili. So, suene is whenever, basically. So whenever the first full moon, gesceche, falls, nach equinoctio, after the equinox, in martio alde in aprili, in March or in April. Now notice here as well that they are using the Latin names for the months, which is curious. We know for a fact from Bede and from other sources that the Germans had their own names for certain months, and in fact, Notker is even using a Germanic word Easter for the feast of Pascha itself. He's not using the Latin term, which is Pascha, which is curious and suggests that the term Easter was very commonly used in local religious practice at the time. But it's curious to me that even in this German language text, he's using the Latin days of the month. My suspicion for why this is a similar reason for why we see the use of Latin names of the month in certain anonymous Old English treatises on this, is because the vast majority of calendars that are written, because bear in mind these written texts are primarily for a monkish audience, so Notker is probably writing this text not for a uneducated person or even a thane from the local community who is not part of the church formally in terms of being a person of religious life and still wants to understand the Computus. No, Notker is writing this for fellow monks whose Latin maybe isn't the greatest, as was increasingly a problem in Germanic-speaking areas of the Western Latin Church at the time. So all of these monks will be in a literary environment which is predominantly Latin, and the calendars that they are using will be predominantly written in Latin. And so my suspicion is that this partly explains the increased use of loanwords also, is that by using the Latin names of the month, Notker is equipping anybody who reads this text to be able to open up a calendar they'll see and be like, oh, okay, I get that I see this word Martio and in Aprili. I know that Easter falls between these two months. This is the rough range where it can fall. Whereas if Notker used the Germanic names of the month, a person whose Latin isn't the greatest may get a bit confused when they're looking at a manuscript with the calendar in it, and so the calendar wouldn't be as useful for them because the calendars are almost always written in Latin exclusively. So that's why he's using the Latin names for the months here. So anyway, got a topic again. So whenever the first full moon follows after the equinox in March or in April, so heute des Sonnentages tar habist du Ostern. Whichever day is Sunday, tar habist tu Ostern. That is where you will have the Easter. So he's saying the first full moon that happens after the equinox in March or in April, you will have your Easter on the first Sunday that comes after that. Teis ne wirdet neomer wechsel. Let there never be any exchange or alteration of this principle. Ziu soll man aber bieten. To which one may ask afterwards, uns equinoctium vergange unde plenilunium komme. When does the equinox depart and the full moon come? Anne dat tas ware ostren sind und wario resurrectio anime. On that day, where the Easters are, there are also the vario resurrectio anime, the true resurrection of souls. Now this this is kind of interesting because he's using a German adjective, variu, and he's using the resurrectio anime, the resurrection of the soul, which is a Latin religious term. And this gives us an interesting little bit of insight into perhaps exegesis and preaching as well. This suggests that the theology of the Catholic Church was translated in Latin to such an extent that religious terms were thought of in Latin rather than in English, as to a large extent is still the case in theology today. We say sort of resurrection and epiphany rather than sort of afterlife or getting up again and appearance. We use these Latin and Greek theological terms still, and they seem to have been doing that in the time period as well, when Notker was writing in the 11th century, to such an extent that he uses a German adjective with the Latin noun, because that noun is useful to get the concept of the soul's resurrection across immediately to his audience. And notice that he is contrasting the two. So when you have a Ware Ostern, the true Easters, and you have a Vario Resurrectio Anime, you have the true resurrection of the souls. And this links into something I'm doing for my thesis, which is the link conceptually between correct and orthodox computistical calculation and both mental and spiritual health in the Middle Ages. It is essential for the resurrection of souls that people celebrate Easter on the right day. And this, I think, led in the minds of medieval people to all sorts of other associations. Somebody who, in their Easter calculations, is arriving at the wrong date, is disagreeing with Rome's judgment on when Easter should fall, that can be the result either of mental illness or even of a deliberate maliciousness, as Bede sort of implies some of the Irish and British bishops might well have had in his Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum. So in this one sentence, we see a glimpse at a really fascinating conceptual link in the medieval mind between Orthodox computistical study and health, which I'm going to be exploring in my thesis. And hopefully once that's actually done, I will make some videos telling you guys more about what I find in regards to that. So what he's saying here is that you will have the true resurrection of souls when you have the true Easter. Overwirre via finstri der sundon overwinden. If we overwind, so we sort of cover up dia finstri, the windows der sundon of our souls, I believe, of sins rather, mit temo lierte der guati, with the light of God. So this is kind of interesting, with the light of God coming in. This is a very common trope that's used in literature surrounding Computus in early medieval sources. So, for instance, Bede in his ecclesiastical history mentions a blind man who is brought to St. Augustine to prove that Augustine's method of computistical calculation is correct, and the bishops who are from Britain, using the indigenous Celtic church's calculation of Easter, they're unable to cure this man's blindness. And then when St. Augustine, using the Dionysian approved Roman method of calculating the date of Easter, touches this man, the light is restored to his eyes. So Easter brings the light, literally the lux Christi, lumen Christi, back into the world. And the same thing is happening here. He's saying we sort of like, and it's a curious kind of metaphor actually, that we sort of cover the windows of sin with the light of God. It's a curious kind of metaphor, perhaps the curtain being kind of reference to the New Covenant, the New Testament, like this idea we're covering with the curtain of the New Testament, which isn't necessarily stated directly here. And because we're covering it with the light of good or of God. So that light presumably being the resurrection, and who is being resurrected? It's Christ, representing the New Covenant, the New Testament. So that's just my reading of that bit. That Notker, the analogy Notker is drawing here is that in the same way as the light that comes in Easter represents the resurrection of souls, we should likewise, I guess, cover up sin, and in so doing we are like covering the windows to sin with the light of Christ and of Christian living. Also die Sonne begunnet überwinden die Nacht. just like the sun begins to overshadow the night, let's say, or sort of, yeah, come over the night. So it's kind of a beautiful metaphor here of Easter and all of these astronomical configurations reflecting on our personal souls and our health. And this is a very common trope in literature on the subject. We can see it in Bede's, for instance, De Temporum Ratione, with chapter 35, talking about the metaphor of man as a mini cosmos, microcosmos, a small universe wrapped up into one. So there we go. That's the High German Computus from start to finish. And I'm sorry I injected a lot of my own rambling there. But basically, from start to finish, it reads, there is one question in the Computus to which the others look. That is this, where the Easter should stand. This will be soon answered thus. The first full moon falls after the equinox, and in this full moon Easters shall be held. The equinoxes happen every year, 12 days before the first day of April, but the full moon happens every month on the 15th moon. When it comes to the morning after this equinox, on the 11th day before the calendar of April, that is the Easter day, if it is Sunday. If it's not Sunday, when the first Sunday comes, that is when the Easter shall have come. About this, never forget this. Whenever the first full moon falls after the equinox in March or in April, whichever Sunday it is, that is where you will have Easter. Let there be no changing of this ever. To this, one may ask, when the equinox goes and the full moon comes, on this day where there is a true Easter, there will be the true resurrection of souls. If we close up the windows of sins with the light of God, just as the sun overshadows the night. So there we go. That is the Old High German Computus, and I might save the Latin Computus, I reckon, for another video because we've done a lot here already, and it would be nice to keep this in Old High German. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you want me to teach you Latin, Old English, Gothic, or any of the other languages I do on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video, and I offer tuition at lower than market rates. You can also join my Discord server, where I tend to post these glosses as images before I turn them into videos, so you can get early access to them there. And it's also just a fun community of like-minded people. We share memes and sometimes we do movie nights. It's great fun. You should come and join us. And until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you want more videos on Computus, and I hope you have a great day. Bye everyone.